So the book of Isaiah and all of the prophets, or many of the prophets, I should say, in the Old Testament had the difficult job of telling the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Israel at this time had split apart into two kingdoms. That because they had turned away against the ways of God and following God, that they were going to be punished by being removed from their homelands and taken over by a other empire. And this, as you can imagine, was not a very popular message. And it, for the various prophets, Isaiah being one, Jeremiah being another, it was a message that really weighed on them very heavily. Because as you can imagine, if you can see something like that coming from, in this case, literally a mile away, you kind of are filled with a bit of a dread, a bit of a sense that the world is kind of coming apart. And in fact, in Isaiah, he talks about these types of things. Within our own verse, we have, a bit of that imagery of the hail flattening a forest and a city being completely leveled. It's this feeling that, judgment is coming and it's going to not be particularly great for us. That is a feeling that comes, I think, whenever things just are going completely nuts. Now, obviously, right now, that is the way things are in our country. And I will never say that whenever anything happens like this, that it is due to God's judgment or not, or even imply that. So if you think that I am, please do not. The reality is that I don't know I am not a prophet. I do not know what God is or isn't doing or has planned for our country or why these things are happening in that case. We have other examples in Scripture where when bad things happen and when the world seems to be falling apart, that, that it really isn't because God is punishing anybody. That's the entire, idea of the book of Job. The book of Job is literally a book about how sometimes when bad things happen, it's not because you did anything wrong. Which, is a good message to keep in mind. What I think, though, is interesting about this passage specifically is that even with all of the stuff that Isaiah knew was going to be coming onto the kingdom of Judah, he still had that hope and sense of peace that there was going to be a point where they were going to be restored. We have messianic prophecies within the book of Isaiah alluding to this, alluding to a day when God's kingdom comes to earth. And that's a very, whenever you see that kind of hopeful message in the midst of these types of things and these types of events, it's encouraging, but it also at sometimes maybe makes you wonder, how did we get here? How do you have that kind of hope when you're faced with this? The best answer that I can give is to just kind of be willing to let go and accept that God has a plan for that situation. And I know that is easier said than done. In fact, a few weeks ago, I even talked about how that can seem insulting at times. But it is something which I think we need to keep in mind, that God does have a plan, and He does have a plan that is going to bring us out of all of this and restore us to a point where, we are blessed again, or we feel like we're being blessed again, even though we are experiencing blessings every day, even if we maybe don't realize it. So that is, to me, something that we need to keep in mind during these times and during, when it does seem like everything is just falling apart. I know there have been many a memes and many a comment that people have made about how 2020, feels like kind of the end of the world. And that maybe, how 2021 cannot be worse than 2020. Well, watch out. But the reality is like, in all of these things, no matter what happens, keeping that hope and that understanding that better times are coming, that is something that we can cling to and can help bring us through this and find peace in these types of situations. So that is all that I have for us today. If you will join me at wherever you are, whether at home or out, as we go into our final worship song for today. And I wish you all a good week.